Hatcher.
Eddie, this is Charlie Gaddy. How are you?
Well, it's a tense situation, and it's getting more tense by the hour. That dark's coming, and I'm afraid that they're going to make an unwise move.
Welcome to the Daily Download. I'm Travis Fain. That back and forth you just heard comes from 35 years ago this month when two men walked into a newspaper in Robeson County with sawed-off shotguns, took hostages, and demanded to speak to the governor. During the 10-hour affair, WRAL news anchor Charlie Gaddy called the newspaper and spoke with Eddie Hatcher, the lead gunman. Jay Jennings was in the WRAL newsroom that day, and he worked the story. He's now part of WRAL's documentary unit, and he joins us today. Welcome, Jay.
Thanks, Travis.
All right, take us in to the studio, the TV studio, that day as you hear two armed men have chained the doors shut at the Robesonian newspaper office. Take us to the decision to call down there and ask to speak to hostage takers and eventually put this live on air.
Gotcha. Yeah, it was a crazy morning. Right around 10 o'clock, we get word that something's going on in Lumberton. Something's going on at the Robesonian, at the newspaper in Lumberton. And we need to be on that story. So part of what happened was we tried to scramble Sky 5 because it's an hour and a half plus.
Yeah, get the chopper in the air.
Yeah, get it in the air. And we had equipment problems at the chopper. They couldn't find some of the camera gear that was supposed to be in there. So we're now behind on the story. Even though we're reporting it, we're having trouble getting people there. We've scrambled LiveStar. We've scrambled at least two crews to go down there, plus the Fayetteville Bureau. But in many ways, because we couldn't get the chopper in the air, we were behind. So that led me to have a conversation with Charlie Gaddy, our longtime anchor. You know, Charlie was
retired in 1994.
Oh my gosh,
beloved.
Just the best. One of the great people who's ever walked the halls here, and just a great journalist. Charlie was just trying to figure out how can we push this story forward? How can we get back in the game? And I just said, I think why don't we call the Robesonian? And he said, let's do it. Next thing you know, Charlie is on the set. We've run it past the news director. She's given us the go-ahead. And Charlie's dialing the Robesonian newspaper, and I'm in the control room.
And are you thinking, oh boy, this could go a lot of ways?
You know, at the time, Travis, I think I was 29 years old. And there's things you do at 29 that you wouldn't dream of doing at 39, 49, or 59. I think it was, part of this was the excitement of the moment. And, I wouldn't do the same today. I mean, we would have done something, but we would have put a lot of safeguards on it.
And we probably should back up. So these two men, they were Tuscarora Indians.
Yep.
They were essentially protesting, although that doesn't sound like the right word in a hostage situation, the racism and corruption in Robeson County. And I mean, they weren't wrong.
No, they weren't. And there had been you have to put this in context. Robeson County has had a history of racial tension between it's almost 1/3 white, 1/3 Native American, and 1/3 black.
Triracial. A lot of times you hear it called.
Exactly. And so previous to this, there have been protests, especially by the Native American community and people of color, that they felt like there was corruption and there was racial prejudice. And even just prior to this, a gentleman by the name of Julian Pierce, who was running for judge, was murdered in his home. Right, and he was killed right before the election. So there was a lot of talk: was this an assassination? And so that's what led up to all this, and it kind of bubbled over on February 1st, 1988.
And these two guys, they decided, Eddie Hatcher and
Timothy Jacobs.
They decided, and Timothy Jacobs was 19. Eddie Hatcher was 30 at the time. They decided they were going to take the newspaper hostage and demand to speak to then Governor Jim Martin. And that was when Charlie Gaddy asked, "What do you want?" That's what he wants. He wants to talk.
I mean, Eddie cut to the chase, man. He didn't waste any time. We demand that the governor of this state invest, basically a special task force, a special prosecutor to investigate their claims of corruption in Robeson County.
And I'll play a little more of the call in a second. If folks who want to hear the whole thing can just Google it, WRAL, Charlie Gaddy, Eddie Hatcher. It's going to pop up. We
Yep.
we marked the anniversary of it recently. I was struck before y'all went on live. Gaddy is just so calm. He's just, Hatcher will say something and Gaddy just, all right. And how many people are there? Just steadily getting information.
And, I think that's one of the things that makes Charlie the pro that he was. He brought calm to the call. I think he probably more than anybody else understood what he was dealing with and how the last thing he wanted to do was incite a situation. But you get this strange thing, this woman, Renee Bollinger in advertising, answers the call. And Charlie has this conversation with her. It's very kind of matter of fact about, tell me what's going on and who's there and is there somebody there? And he asked to speak to one of the gentlemen who's holding them hostage. And she goes, I'll ask. And she puts Charlie on hold. And the hold music.
Yeah.
The hold. I mean, it's a song by the Stylistics. You're My Everything. Is that what?
Oh my
gosh! It's here in this moment that's full of tension. You have this kind of surreal Coen Brothers moment of this hold music.
Yeah, the hold music got me too, and just the calmness of the conversation. This had been going on for a while at this point. Yes. Yep. All right, and so I'm going to play.
It's early afternoon. It's been going on since about 10. This is early mid afternoon.
All right, and so a decision is made. We're on the phone, and we're going to break into regular programming. I'm going to play people just a little bit of how that went live on air.
Tell me what your plans are, Eddie. Nobody's been hurt yet. What do you intend to do?
We have now barricaded doors. We're where the SWAT team is in the area. I've been on the phone with the United States Attorney General's office, Department of Justice, with the governor's office, but the governor has failed to call. He sees this as maybe might hurt his political career in the future as to how he gets involved in this. We have doors barricaded. At sunset, if necessary, we'll cut all lights. So if any shots are fired in here, no one will know who's getting shot. But once the shots start, then it goes full blast.
Okay, so I mean, obviously, a rough situation there. Yeah. What was that like hearing that kind of go out to the world?
Well, so also understand. So Charlie had been on the phone with Eddie for about 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody comes into the control room to say, hey, you need to hang up the call because we need to do an update. We need Charlie to tape an update. And so that's when we convinced, let's let this be
the news
this
break.
Is the update.
Right.
And so Charlie asked Eddie, do you mind us going live? Eddie says yes, and so we do. And it was just now we've kind of upped the ante at this point. Yeah. We're going from recording the call of a tense situation to now Eastern North Carolina is on the phone with Eddie Hatcher.
And was this something that captivated the public's attention at the time? I mean, everybody was talking about it, I assume?
Absolutely. It was. And again, we had been covering the problems and the situation in Robeson County. This was not a new story.
Right.
We'd been covering these stories for a couple of years. So it was in the viewers had it in context. They knew what was going on.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the fallout from this, how the public responded, and we'll take it from there. Thanks for staying with us. Welcome back. We're talking to Jay Jennings here at WRAL. He's part of the documentary team here at the TV station, and 35 years ago was part of the coverage of the hostage taking at the Robesonian newspaper. We've been talking, how did the public respond to these men? You know, they never hurt anybody, they never shot anybody, but they said they chained the doors. They said they had hand grenades wired to the doors. They had sawed-off shotguns, maybe other weapons. I mean, it was a very, very real situation. The SWAT team was outside. How did the public respond? Were they angry with these guys? Were they understanding? What happened?
I think it was a mixed bag. I think it kind of depends on where you fall on the political spectrum in many ways. I think generally, at the time, North Carolina was a law enforcement kind of state. I'm sure that was, it's not a good thing when you take hostages. But I will say this: Hatcher and Jacobs really, at several moments along the way, in good faith, they let several people go. They let several. It was down to there was like 17. I think they were down to 7 by the time.
By the time the call happened, I think it was down to 9 or 10, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
But they had let people go, as you say. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think while I do think Hatcher and Jacobs, what they really wanted was this special prosecutor and this task force to go in, which they did do. And there's some question about how effective any of that was.
Task force lasted 10 days.
Yeah. But on the other hand, I think awareness. I think it shone a spotlight on Robeson County and what was going on there. I think the state knew about it, but I think nationally, it was on CBS Evening News. We were CBS station at the time. It was on the national news. CNN carried it. So the nation suddenly knew about this little town on I-95 just north of the South Carolina border.
Yeah, and so they served time. Hatcher eventually got out of prison, murdered somebody. I believe it was a drive-by shooting, and he died in prison on that charge in 1999. According to the Robesonian newspaper, Timothy Jacobs is now about 54 years old, still lives down there. The Assembly, which is kind of an online magazine here in North Carolina, they did a good long piece. We've had some coverage if people are interested in kind of revisiting all this. So we mentioned that task force. So they never got to talk to the governor, but the governor did create a task
Phil
force.
Phil Kirk, his chief of staff, basically brokered the deal and kind of ran point on it, from what I understand.
Yeah, it sounds like not a lot came of it. And then 20 years later, state and federal investigators run an operation called Tarnished
Badge.
And it's deputies down there basically pulling people over, taking the drugs, and reselling them. Is that?
Yeah, among other things. And it was weird. There were cell phone cards involved, and it was just kind of crazy stuff. And it kind of resulted in Tarnished Badge. The other thing that happened along the way, just 5 years later, that was the location of James Jordan's murder along I-95 and in US 74.
Oh, wow.
So
Michael Jordan's father, James Jordan.
Jordan's father. And so there was a lot of the charges, a lot of things that were brought up.
A lot of the corruption kind of was
pointed by Daniel Green. He was pointing to that same corruption and prejudice in the law enforcement and judicial community in that put him in a bad spot. Basically, he felt like he and Larry Demery got railroaded. So that was all part of that. So it's a real complicated narrative down there that when you pull on, that goes back generations actually. But if you pull on one thing, everything kind of moves.
You ever talk to any of the hostages from that day? I mean, did they hold a grudge? I would probably.
I have. Scott Mason and I interviewed Bob Horn, who was the editor of the paper. Bob actually, when Hatcher and Jacobs gave themselves up, Horn walked in front of them as a human shield just to make sure the police didn't try to take him out.
Wow,
which I thought was it was interesting talking to like Bob Horn. And I also a sports writer named Sammy Batten, who Sammy and I have covered a lot of games together back in my sports days. These folks, while they were hostages, really covered it like journalists. They were recording the facts of the time. When you talk to Bob, he's like talking. He's got details.
He's got a timeline in his head.
And then there's Donnie Douglas, who eventually became the editor of the paper. He was the sports editor at the time. And he laughs about the fact that when he was at back of the sports desk, and when he heard somebody had come through the front door with shotguns, he says, "I was out the back door."
Yeah.
So, it's still when you go down to Lumberton, and it's hard to walk past or drive past the Robesonian, which is they've since moved, but that building that's there, it's hard to go past it without thinking about.
I bet
helicopters in the air and SWAT teams on tops of buildings and on top of buildings and all that.
Well, it was a heck of a story, and appreciate you taking some time.
Thank you for asking
to revisit it with us, and thanks, folks, for listening. We appreciate you making us part of your routine. Another great way to get WRAL news in the morning is The Morning Briefing newsletter, it's a daily email. It's waiting in your inbox every morning. Got Triangle news, events, headlines to get you ready for the day. You can sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter. Thank you for your time and thank you for your attention.